one of the things that messes people up is that they don't set deadlines for themselves. So, in my production company and making all the films that I made and the commercials and all that kind of stuff, people say, well, what if you had writer's block? Same thing with my play. What do you do? And I said, I think of the deadline. I have to get this done. I have a responsibility to get this done.
It's the Inspiration Place podcast with artist Miriam Schulman. Welcome to the Inspiration Place podcast, an art world insider podcast for artists by an artist, where each week we go behind the scenes to uncover the perspiration and inspiration behind the art. And now, your host, Miriam Schulman.
All right, we're ready to get started. With me today is Jeffrey Maddoff. Jeffrey is the author of Creative Careers. He's also co-host of a podcast with Dan Sullivan. Did I get that right?
Yes, called Anything and Everything.
Anything and Everything. And do you have your own podcast, Creative Careers? Do you have two things?
No, I do not.
Just the one. Okay. And you have a play that is being produced in London. And has it been cast?
Yes.
Excellent. Congratulations. All right. So I invite, and Jeff has done many other things as well. And he's also his second time on the podcast, which is really the main credentials that he was on my podcast already. So what I invited Jeffrey to do today, and we've had absolutely zero prep on this. So this is like, he has no idea what I'm about to throw at him. So I've been collecting what I call weird art news articles for us to discuss and make jokes about and do all the things. And if our jokes don't work, that will be cut out of the podcast.
So the podcast will end after I say I'm somewhere between 20 and 117 blocks away from you.
And it'll be a bunch of bums, like the drum set.
Rim shots,
drum kit. Yes. Okay, you ready?
Kind of impossible to be ready, right? I mean,
right,
just
exactly.
show up.
That's right. Okay. What do you think of this? This artist here, so it's an Australian artist, Lindy Lee, was given $10 million, and that's Australian dollars, but US dollars, that's 6.7 million US dollars worth of pure gold to make a sculpture. And this is supposed to give attention to using real gold for making art. I have some thoughts about this. I want to hear your thoughts first.
Well, first of all, it made me think of your earphones.
Okay.
What was the purpose of it again?
This is the part that I get kind of annoyed. So she called the sculpture Abundance. So remember, this is $10 million worth of gold. And the purpose is they wanted to give more emerging and established Australian artists the opportunity to work in Australian gold and silver. So, all right, I'm just going to not bury the lead. My problem with this is why give one artist, again, this is going to sound like socialism, but why give one artist $10 million worth of gold? Like, if they want to give more artists the opportunity to work with gold and silver, why not give 10 artists $1 million or 100 artists? What do you mean, less gold to work with? I just a little bit confused how this is going to get their mission across. I don't know. Do you disagree with me? What do you think?
No, it's like I forget the author's name, but who won the Academy Award for American Fiction this past year, which I thought was one of the absolute best movies of 2023. And he said, for what it costs to make one of these Marvel superhero movies, you could do 10 movies like mine. So why don't we fund independent filmmakers so that more people have a chance to create the art and get it out there? So it kind of reminds me of that. And your thinking is the same as mine, is why give so much to one? And is that what they said? Just as it was all going to one artist? Is that what it said in the article?
Yes, but like, I don't necessarily in and of itself have a problem with one person using $10 million worth of gold. Well, maybe I do have a problem. I'm not really sure. But if they said the reason was because they wanted to give more emerging and established artists the opportunity to work with Australian gold and silver. So it seems like that's not helping their purpose.
Maybe they want to give one more artist the
I don't
opportunity.
know. I don't know. I'm looking to see if there's something else that I missed. Yeah. The public will first see abundance when it forms part of the exhibition Lindy Lee, October 25th through June in 2025. So that is next year.
Which isn't so far away. We're in the ninth
No.
month already.
Yeah, but it's a year from now. Okay, and it says promptly attracted criticisms for spending such a large amount on just one work. So the critics agree with us, by the way. All right. So
and by the way, I think that you're right. If somebody wants to put $10 million worth of gold into a project and that's their art, so be it. But if your mission is to give more people the chance to do something,
then it sounds like it's counterintuitive to what your mission is.
Well, actually, not counterintuitive. It's opposing.
Counterproductive.
Yeah, a contradiction to what your method is.
Yes.
Weird intent.
Yeah, sticking with the theme of money turned into artwork, there is an exhibit called Money Talks. It's in London, Museum in Oxford until January 5th of 2025. And there is this dress. Can you see that?
Yes.
The dress is made. Oh, and by the way, listeners, we will put a picture of the dress and the gold sculpture in the show notes. I don't remember what number this is, but it will be in the show notes. So just wherever you're listening, click over to the show notes. So it's a Victorian looking dress and it is made out of paper money.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I don't have a problem with.
No, I think, in a way, it says a great deal about fashion.
Right.
Yeah.
And for listeners who maybe don't have the same idea in their heads that I think we both do, why don't you explain that? What do you think it says about fashion?
Well, it costs money, and your money through some alchemy turns into a dress. A fabrics are bought and all of that. Well, here now you just take the money, make the clothes out of it, and you skip the middle step.
And by the way, it's probably cheaper to make a dress out of money than it is to source all the proper materials. Possibly.
Yeah, I mean, depending, of course, on the denomination.
Right.
If you did it
It's actually a cool looking dress, I think it's kind of cool.
I've seen, by the way, my wife made a dress out of candy wrappers, and she made an apron out of candy wrappers, and it was really quite cool. And in and of itself, paper fashion has a history, which is kind of interesting, but it's more of a statement when you're actually using paper money to make that garment, because I think it's saying more about the fashion industry, which is kind of interesting.
Now, is she in the fashion industry?
She was. My wife was a model.
Oh, okay. That's very cool. I mean, I know they had like an exhibit at the Museum of Design. Is that the museum where they had like paper dresses? Like that was a thing in the 60s too. Like kind of like paper napkins. They had paper dresses.
And there's also, by the way, paper hats that are sold every summer. It's almost like straw hats, but they're literally woven of paper.
Okay, so when we come back, we'll be talking about none other than the Mona Lisa. But first, I wanted you to hear from one of my newest Artist Incubator members, because people are always wondering if they're too old to do this. And I love her spirit and what she has to say.
Well, first is I've looked at a lot of these opportunities, I'll call it, and there is a difference that I've noticed. So to your credit, I'm getting more answers from people that you have talking to us about you, from people that I think I more relate to. First of all, I'm 82 years old, so that puts me, I'm not an aspiring, marvelous, whatever, for the next 10 years as a professional. I decided I was going to be doing something with my time. And so I went back into my other love, which is art. drawing, painting.
So if you're interested in learning more about the Artist Incubator, like when it opens next, head on over to schulmanart.com/B as in boy, I as in ice cream, Z as in Z. We did set up a waiting list on there so you can be the first one to know when it opens. And depending on when you're listening to this, it may actually be open right now. The only way you can find out is to go to that page and see if this is one of those open registration times. Okay, let's get back to the show. Okay, I have one more money one. So this is about the Mona Lisa. Have you been to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa or tried to see the Mona Lisa?
I have and did. And it was funny because I saw the classic caricature of an American tourist family where the quite overweight father, husband with the kids who couldn't care less, and the wife was trying to get them to appreciate the art. And your husband said, this is a true story, by the way. Husband said, all right, we've seen the Mona Lisa. Can we get out of here?
Yeah. And meanwhile, if you're a true art lover, the room where the Mona Lisa is, it's not the only artwork in that room. Like there's a whole bunch of other masterpieces, which are arguably more important, what air quotes more important, because everything, it's all subjective. But you can go have like a nice, quiet, private viewing because everyone else is gathered around. It's like the decoy. They're gathered around the Mona Lisa.
Right.
You know, it's like Mickey Mouse. Okay. So what this article is about is they've been talking about moving the Mona Lisa and building its own room for it. And it will cost 500 million euros to build this separate Mona Lisa room.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is actually an opinion piece by Ben Luke in the Art News magazine. And he says, oh, they should just write it off. Like, in other words, not write off the 500 million euros, but like stop spending money on making the Mona Lisa a better experience for people. It's just not worth investing anything in, is what he was saying.
You know what I found amazing about the Mona Lisa, or surprising, I should say, about Mona Lisa is we've all seen pictures of it. I didn't realize how small it was.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a surprise when you first saw it, how small the Mona Lisa was or is?
I mean, you can't even really see it. There are so many people gathered around it, and then it's behind this little glass box, so that so people can't throw paint on it or shoot a bullet through it or whatever it is. So it's really hard to see it.
Yeah, and wasn't it trashed not too long ago? Somebody tried to throw paint or tomato sauce or something on it.
That's always happening now. Like the environmental activists with their tomato soup, and so they keep. But I think the glass box is way before that happened, because when I went to see it, it was I think I went on my honeymoon, which I've been married 30 years, so that was a long time ago. Yeah, so it was already behind a glass box.
But yeah, talk about, by the way, excess spending 500 million pounds on
euros,
a separate room or euros. Yeah, I'm sorry. On a separate room for the Mona Lisa seems absolutely ridiculous. Why don't they acquire other art or do other things that enhance the museum rather than that?
Yeah, so we're totally going to be accused of being socialists after this episode airs. I don't care, by the way, but yeah, between our opinions on the gold piece and this piece. But this is what they're saying in here. They're like, listen, first of all, it was never meant to be a public viewing painting. Like Da Vinci's intention was that he made this painting for the husband of the sitter, like to have it as a private piece of art. It wasn't meant to be a public piece of art.
Well, first of all, most art was commissioned originally by the church, and then royalty, where they had to put idealized versions of what these people look like, and the portraiture and so on. And to argue that it was meant for those eyes only the idea of a museum or a gallery is the gathering of works for others to see. So does that mean and by the way, I've heard, I don't know what the truth is, but I've heard the Mona Lisa was a prostitute that Da Vinci had been with. And so who she was is still, I think, a mystery.
I think you're right about that. In this article, it does seem to have some knowledge, or at least pretends to have some knowledge about it. So who is it that said this? Chief curator of 16th century Italian paintings has pointed out Leonardo wanted to establish a face-to-face relationship between the painting and the person contemplating it. And then they say it was done for the sitter's husband. But I don't know I don't actually know what the research stands on it. It just seems, in this article, it seems to think that they know.
And so does that mean that the painting should be what once that person is dead? Because I'm sure by now they're dead. Right?
Right. I think you're right about that.
Yeah. Or they're, 527 years old or something.
Right.
So
they had the Sorcerer's Stone or whatever yes. It was in Harry Potter. Yeah. So this guy's opinion was that the money should be spent not on one painting. I like your idea of investing in more art, but the Louvre, I think it's more of I don't think they really have a lot. They invest in new acquisitions, but drawing visitors' attention to other masterpieces rather than spending so much money to enhance the experience of the one piece people seem to know about. Like,
right.
Educate the public about these other artworks.
Well, that's the important point that you're making. And, what is the purpose of a museum? What is the purpose of an art gallery? And museum presupposes a certain age. But then again, the Museum of Modern Art also has contemporary things. It's interesting because I think it speaks more to our culture than anything else. The culture of where art isn't really appreciated, but people will marvel at how much a painting went for, how much it's sold for. But the origin of the art, the inspiration for the art, the story behind it, in most cases, people don't know. So, as you were saying, you sort of know what you're supposed to like.
Yeah.
And then like that family we saw the Mona Lisa. Can we get out of here now? It's like,
yeah. But
there's not the appreciation.
It's also like your comment earlier about, do we make 10 really high quality movies or one Marvel movie? It's like the fast food of art and culture.
Well, what it is that art, especially in our culture, but art is, so my play is happening in London. It's really interesting. In London, of course, because of a guy named William Shakespeare, I'm sure that your listeners have heard about, there is a culture for theater that translates into tax rebates for the production, for investment incentives, so more theater can be made because there is the embedded cultural belief that theater is important. So we only know sort of the headliners, and people are always looking to de-risk whatever it is they do. So if this movie was really successful, they'll make 10 more movies like that movie that was really successful. And I think that we're talking about a business enterprise. And of course, there's nothing the matter with movie companies wanting to make a profit and thinking they'll make a profit on superhero movies, and they will make those until the audience is exhausted, which actually seems to be the point we're at now, because other than Wolverine and, oh God, what's his name? The latest. But, it's like most things. If it's successful, there will be sequels.
Yeah.
And in a way, you could say that happens in art too, that if something is successful and the artist continues to paint, but if an artist wants to explore other realms, they often face criticism. Where to me, if you embrace art, then you embrace the process and are open to seeing things that are unexpected. But I think there's a reason why there's so many McDonald's. It's because people know they want the certainty that they're going to get those hamburgers and fries that they like wherever they go. And Art's
I don't
contrary to
eat
that.
at McDonald's, but I feel that way about Starbucks. Like, even though there are much better coffee places, but when I'm traveling, a lot of times I find myself gravitating to Starbucks, not because I think it's so great, but I know what I'll get.
Right.
So,
Well, people like that. I mean,
yeah.
people like knowing what they're going to get. People don't like surprises,
No, because the brain craves certainty.
which doesn't exist anyhow. But yes.
Yes, correct. All right. Now, speaking of London and speaking of sequels, that perfectly cues me up for this prepared episode. All right. So the next article I have is about the Courtwald show to make Monet's 1905 London dream of exhibiting his Thames work a reality. So we will link. Can you see that?
Yes.
Seeing the art is really not the point of our conversations, by the way, but we will link the pictures in the show notes. But the reason that I wanted to discuss this is he was going to have this exhibit back in his lifetime, and he canceled it because he thought his art wasn't good enough. I just thought that was wow, because this is one of the things I'm always hearing from emerging artists and artists who are coming to coach with me is their biggest fear is their art isn't good enough. And here's Monet canceled his exhibition because he thought his art wasn't good enough. And there's a great quote in here that said, he told a journalist in 1901, quote, "I am never contented with my work. I let a picture go because I would work on it forever if I didn't." So I just thought this was a really good lesson on the editing and process and about when you let art go. So I'm sure you have some thoughts about this.
I don't.
Too bad.
There's a phrase that great art is never finished, it's abandoned.
Yeah.
And to use a technical term that my grandmother often used, you could potchka around forever, And, the play that I'm working on, it's a very organic process. When you are in rehearsals and when you're in previews, you're always changing. But then before opening night, 2 performances before, the play is locked. No more changes because it's too disorienting to the actors, lighting cues, costume changes. There's a whole ripple effect with anything that you do. So I think that you can always do something else. But what motivates me is I like that phrase, it's just abandoned.
Yeah.
But that's not really true. I think one of the things that messes people up is that they don't set deadlines for themselves. So, in my production company and making all the films that I made and the commercials and all that kind of stuff, people say, well, what if you had writer's block? Same thing with my play. What do you do? And I said, I think of the deadline. I have to get this done. I have a responsibility to get this done. I can give you a funny sidebar to this.
Good, because that's why I invited you. It's all about the sidebars. It's like how I order food in a restaurant. It's all about the side dishes. It's never about what the main thing is.
We're doing a reading of the screenplay that I had. And it was about 15 minutes before curtain. And there were about 200 people. The audience was full for this reading. And one of the actors who had a small part came up to me and said, I have a problem. My character, I don't think he would say that. And so I don't know. I don't get it. And I need the motivation. And I said, okay, 2 things. Number 1, the character would say that because I created that character. And that's what I wrote for him to say.
Yeah.
So you're hearing from the source.
Yeah.
And number 2, come here. And I pull back the curtain and he sees the full theater. And I said, and that's your motivation. The curtain now goes up in 12 minutes.
Wow.
Oh,
That's
okay.
Good.
All right. I get it. And
that's good.
But I think, I don't look at deadlines as something that loom. I look at them for myself as a threshold I have to cross to get to where I want to go. So I think it's really easy to get stuck, but I think it's really important to approach what I do, whatever the creative process is, it's also how I make my living, which means I've got to deliver in a timely fashion. Somebody commissions a piece of artwork from you, or they buy a piece of your work. They don't want to hear, well, she's still working on it. Yeah, but it was supposed to be done 3 years ago. Yeah, but it's not quite right yet.
Yeah. I mean, often, so I have so many follow-ups, but just on your most recent one, when I was doing pet portrait commissions, and I really didn't like doing them, by the way. Hopefully none of my pet portrait customers are listening. Actually, I don't care if they are. So I would get sick of working on it. And then I would just say, all right, let me take a picture of it and tell them it's done and see what happens. And if they like it, then it's really done. It's like, then okay, I'm off the hook. And pretty much every time that's what would happen. They'd be like, oh, it's so great. Like, good, I'm done with it. But I do want to circle back to something you were saying about the play. I heard a very similar story. You may have heard this too, where Jason Alexander went to Larry David and said, I really don't think my character would say this. And I don't think anybody would ever say this in real life. Have you heard this story?
No.
Okay. So he said basically the same kind of thing you're telling me, but as his character is George, he went to Larry David and said, I don't think anybody would say this. I don't get it. Help me out. I need motivation. And Larry David says, what are you talking about? I said that. And that's what I did. And that's when Jason Alexander understood for the first time his character was Larry David. Like before that point in time, he didn't know that, like that's who he was supposed to be modeling. And then it was like, oh, okay. So, yeah.
Well, that brings up something I think that's really interesting for an artist is understanding your connection to the work.
Say more.
So for instance, when we were going to start rehearsals for Personality in our Chicago run, you start off doing a table read, which is when all the actors are sitting around a table. You hear each other's voices for the first time. And you read through the whole script. And the guy that played young Lloyd Price, wonderful actor, Darian Peer. And we had a get together after the table read. We wanted to go to a bar away from the stage so everyone could kind of bond and get to know each other after the first day of rehearsal and meeting each other for the first time. So I started to talk to Darian, who was Lloyd Price, and of course, Darian are Black. And Darian grew up in Iowa. And I said, so what brought you to he had moved to New York. Terrifically talented person. And I said, how come you went to New York? He said, there was nothing for me here. I wanted a different life. There wasn't anything for me here. So anyhow, we talked a little more, and then we kind of got back together an hour or so later. And he said, I'm having problems with the character. And I said, tell me what you mean. And he goes, Lloyd's life was so different than mine. And, I'm just trying to relate to it. And I said, didn't you tell me that you lived in Iowa and you wanted to leave there because there was no possibility for you there and for your life to grow creatively as you wanted? He goes, yeah. And I said, what about Lloyd? He grew up in Kenner, Louisiana. He wanted to get out of there because nobody could relate to what he wanted to do. And he saw that the world was a bigger place. So he wanted to go to a bigger place. And Lloyd also went to New York. So he kind of lights up. And I said, so you have a lot more in common with him than you thought, don't you? Because I never thought of it that way. I said, you both wanted to get out. You both felt very marginalized being Black where you were. And this opened up a whole new vista. So Lloyd's ambition, just like your ambition, caused you to make a radical change in your life, to move to the big city, and to express yourself creatively.
Beautiful.
And he said, oh, thank you. Thank you. And it was just kind of really cool that, if he hadn't revealed himself to me earlier about how he felt out of place where he was growing up and all of that, which is what Lloyd felt. And all of a sudden he had then a hook and an entry into the psyche of the character he was playing.
Love that. And since we haven't said so, I do have a perfect, by the way, article to follow this up with. So I'm just putting that hook in there right now. But I don't think we said the name of your play. So what is the name of the play that's about Lloyd Price? And then when is the opening for any of my listeners who are in London?
The play is called Personality, the Lloyd Price musical. It's about rock and roll Hall of Fame legend Lloyd Price. And you probably don't know his name, but you know his music. Songs like Personality, because you've got walk a personality, talk a personality, and much better sung than that, by the way. And Staggerly and Lottie Miss Claudia, and he was an amazing, amazing talent. What we're doing in the UK is we are doing 2 showcases, and this is all for theater professionals. It's theater owners, theater bookers. It's the press. It's not selling tickets to the audiences. We're doing this to raise our profile in London because we're going towards a West End run.
Okay, when we come back, I actually have an article that is about Iowa. Imagine how that happened. But first, I want you to hear from Lynn Sammis. Lynn Sammis, who you've been following her success a lot on this podcast, but I love when you hear directly from her.
I had been doubting my business brain. I just didn't know if I could actually do it. I have no idea how I got the book, but when I read the book, it was just talking to me. And I thought, this gal seems to know exactly what she's talking about. And so I think I literally got online and signed up that day, January 14th.
And one thing, Lynn, that I think people need to hear is because we've been throwing out some really big numbers about your income. But what they need to know is what were you making before? What did you make last year? So in 2023, and I know we've shared this on the podcast already, but not everyone here has heard that episode. What did you make in 2023?
I actually went back to 2023 and found the numbers because I was so frustrated that I wasn't selling anything. And I just was blaming myself. I was doubting myself. And it was actually 13.5 that I brought home. And I realized I was just sitting there waiting for galleries to do it. And
okay, so I was wrong then. It wasn't 35,000 last year. It was 13,000 last year.
Right.
13,500 for all of 2023. Right. And let's just repeat now what we think your projection is for this year, 6 figures.
When you made me write down 75,000, I thought there's no way. And you said, let's push for 100.
I did.
And I thought, are you out of your mind? But we're almost there.
Okay, so Lynn Sammis, who went from making $13,500 in 2023, you may have heard me say previously on the podcast, we thought it was 35,000. Maybe I just misunderstood her, or she didn't give me the number, but we were mistaken. It was actually only 13,500 last year. And that's not to shame Lynn, but to help you understand how much of a difference being inside the incubator and specifically the inner circle has really helped her succeed. She is on her way to being a 6-figure artist. So when she recorded that, it was only 8 months after she had joined the program. And this type of success is available for you too. And Lynn, like Brenda, is also a senior. Lynn has 4 grandchildren and she makes her family a priority. So you don't have to worry about balancing out your time. You can have both. All right, now let's get back to the show. You couldn't have queued me up more perfectly. My next article is about Iowa. All right.
How about that?
It's like pulling the oracle cards of the perfect oracle card for the question. All right. Conserving an Iowa school's little-known Keith Haring mural. And I wasn't sure at the time why I even cut this out, but now I know why I cut it out. So they have this Keith Haring mural in an elementary school that's in Iowa. I don't have anything else to say about that. I don't even know that it's such an interesting thing to talk about, except for the fact that you were just talking about Iowa. So should we talk about this or move on?
Well, the interesting thing about it is I'm old enough to remember when Keith Haring, sort of started getting attention in the city. And what he was doing was kind of creating hieroglyphics, if you will, cave paintings. And those cave paintings were in the subways, it was graffiti essentially. And so where his work was discovered was as important as the work itself, in the sense of where it was displayed. So the city and the underground subways and walls and areas became like Banksy is now, that's where it was first shown. And Keith Haring was one of the first people to be doing that with his art. The fact that something that was very urban in its settings and how the art first came to prominence, the fact that it was in some town in Iowa in a school was kind of interesting, because it makes me wonder, how'd that happen?
Well, it says here that he created the mural as a gift to the school using work with help from the students. And I'm trying to squint my eyes enough to see. I think this was created in 1989. So that was a year before his death.
Well, he did a famous painting that actually was, I think they had it at the DNC convention, not in the main room, but it was Liberty, as in the Statue of Liberty, and then all this stuff at the base of it that was all created by other young students that worked with Keith to do that. And so he has a history of wanting to communicate through his art, inform through his art, and engage through his art, which was quite wonderful.
One of the things that they're saying about it's a really important story to tell right now about the way that this little town in Iowa opened up its arms for an avant-garde graffiti artist whose work was somewhat controversial and who might not have been welcome in other places.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope that gives people some motivation. My last article is here. There's no cat bites taken out of this one.
I mean, I'm very impressed.
Okay. So the headline on this is "My 5-year-old could do that and did." And the thesis is basically that people need these screwed up childhoods in order to grow up to be artists. So let's have a vulnerable moment. How screwed up was your childhood, Jeffrey? I have no idea, actually. So this could be another wah moment that you had a perfect childhood, but go ahead.
I don't know what a perfect childhood is, but I had a good childhood. And I think that, you're a parent also. And to me, the most important thing that a child can get from their parents is a sense of love, respect, and safety. So if you feel loved, if you are respected, meaning that if you have questions, they aren't discounted as being stupid, and that you are supported in what you are doing and you feel safe. Like my parents, because I always drew, because I always wrote, I even drew and wrote comic books when I was in elementary school. My parents were always open to me doing that stuff. And it wasn't that they were somehow enlightened parents. They just, I think, had an innate ability to recognize engagement, and they fostered that. And so that gave me a confidence outside the home that I would do things and not be afraid to put my ideas out there, because I wasn't afraid of those ideas being rejected. Because rejection is just a part. You put your ideas, your opinions, your artwork out there, you're going to meet with rejection. That's going to happen. But the question is, how do you deal with it? Does it shut you down and make you reluctant to do it? Or do you learn something through it? Does it propel you forward because somebody told you couldn't do it? Art can come from a very wonderful place. It can also come from a very dark place, and the net effect to both can be great work. I'm just happy that I don't feel I was screwed up, and that I had loving parents who allowed me to explore those aspects of things that I love doing. And so I felt safe doing it.
I'm so happy to hear that. So my childhood was kind of textbook dysfunctionality. My father passed away when I was 5. Many of my listeners have heard me talk about this. And because I was a child in the 70s, they didn't really prepare me or my sister, who's younger, for this to happen. We basically one day we find out he's not here anymore. And so what happened with me, and I talked about this on the podcast with Jerry Salt, so we'll link to that one in the show notes, because he also had a similar experience where he lost a parent early on and he wasn't prepared for it, is when you have an experience like that, you grow invisible antennas, because the opposite of your childhood, like you felt very safe and that was a beautiful garden where your creativity could flourish. And that's a beautiful thing. But when you grow up where you don't feel safe, then you build these antennas so that you can always be looking out for warning signs of what danger might be there, because you're being told the message that the adults aren't going to tell you. So as a result of that, I feel that I am a little more sensitive than many of my peers who maybe grew up in a 2-parent household, never had a tragic loss like that. So that kind of has informed me as an artist. And it's something that I can talk about losing a parent now without bitterness or regret. I mean, I really didn't know him, so it wasn't a loss for me, but the bitterness of growing up without a father has been so much of who I am and has shaped who I am as a person today. So to regret any of that happening or wishing it was different is to wish myself to be different, if that makes sense. And having acceptance of myself, I can't wish any of it to be different. But I felt very much, is sympathy the right word, for this article about the stories of how some of the early lives of these artists really informed them later, like how some of the things that happened to them when they're young really became the catalyst for them becoming artists later.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting because in the arts, you're creating an expression of some sort, be it music, be it dance, be it painting, be it writing, be it acting, whatever. But there are people who sell insurance, who are dentists, do all these things, who had difficult home lives that cause them to be who they are in certain ways, And so, I mean, people have said to me, oh, you're dealing with actors all the time. Aren't they kind of crazy? No. And they're interesting because what makes them interesting is their vulnerability, because they have to be vulnerable to do good art. Otherwise, it's like Muzak, right? There's plenty of art equivalent of Muzak out there. It's not very interesting. It's not very engaging. It's not offensive. But
Marvel movies.
But at least Marvel movies, to defend them for just only a moment, what Stan Lee, who started Marvel Comics, did is he took characters like Spider-Man, and of course there were others that don't quite fit this, but Spider-Man's a great example of, a troubled teenager who then had these superpowers. And Superman, which was it was Schuster and I think Simon, I'm not positive, but 2 guys that started Superman comics, and it was really a story of assimilation. Clark Kent was the workaday guy at the Daily Planet, who, and I never got this when I was a kid, so he takes off his glasses and nobody recognizes him.
I know. That always bothered me too.
But it was
really, that's all it takes?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Maybe they're thrown off by the cape. I don't know. But, I think that as we are formed by and inform our art, these things happen to other people, but the expression manifests differently. And and I think that is really interesting. And I think that an artist's primary creation, before they can do anything else well, their primary creation is themselves. And then how they come to terms with who they are, the chances they're willing to take, what risks will they undertake, will they put themselves out there, will they be vulnerable? And the artists who continue to grow and grow, they're on a quest, which, and I can totally relate to that. And it just depends on how you deal with the traumas that are going to happen in your life.
That's great. Okay. So we're going to wrap up now. I want to make sure everyone knows where they can get Jeffrey's book, Creative Careers. It also pulls in interesting artist stories. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So if you haven't already gotten that book from the last time he was on the show, we'll make sure that's linked up in the show notes. Jeffrey, do you have any last words for the listeners before we call this podcast complete?
Yeah. My thing is go for it. I think that Nike has the best, even though they've tried to go away from their slogan, just do it. It is, I think, impossible to improve upon that simple phrase because we all set up obstacles. And the question is, how do you overcome those obstacles? And the way you overcome obstacles is you find your way over, under, around, or through them. And that's how you do it. Because the sure way to make sure nothing happens is to do nothing.
Yeah.
And then make up a whole narrative as to why you couldn't. And the thing is, you can, but you have to not be afraid to try.
Also, so a yes and make decisions. And this is something we sort of talked about, but it was like an undercurrent. It was kind of like that whole thing you said, like, no, the play is done. We're not making new decisions about this play anymore. And I think that's one of the things that I see a lot of entrepreneurs and artists get held back is not committing to a decision they've already made and staying in that land of uncertainty. Because if they don't make a decision, they can't move forward.
Right.
So it keeps, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, committing is huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Committing. I mean, this is what the whole Monet thing is like, well, eventually I have to let it go because I can always be making it better. So,
and the best artists, whether they're in the performing arts or painting or whatever, are those who fully commit to the expression that they're doing. And that's what makes something interesting. So when you see a great actor like Daniel Day-Lewis, or Meryl Streep, who so fully commit to the parts that they play, which is what makes it credible. And so you do what it takes to get something done. And you can't do what it takes without committing. And along with commitment, it's not commitment if you don't persevere. If the first time that you hit an obstacle, you give up. That's not commitment. Commitment means kind of like in the marriage vows, right? In sickness and in health, you're going to go through this stuff, and that you're only committed if you don't give up. Now, I'm not talking about fool's errands and stupid stuff, but I'm talking about something that's very primal, one's ability to create and do. And you have to commit in order to do that. And you have to be able to not be defeated by giving up because it's harder than you thought. Because I can assure you, if you want to mount a play, if you want to be a respected artist, if you want to be a novelist, if you want to be a dancer or an athlete, you've got to commit. It's hard. And a lot of people just don't understand and think it's going to be a lot easier because they don't really grip. Yeah, this takes a lot. This doesn't just happen. And I think there's a lot of delusion that takes place because people somehow think it ought to be easier. It's not.
Yeah. And they think that if it doesn't come easy, well, maybe it's because I'm not talented, which really talent has very little to do with it. Commitment is much more
perseverance.
Important.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We're going to end right there. Thank you so much for joining me here today. This was amazing. And listener, I hope you enjoyed it too. Stay tuned for next week. We'll be here same place, same time. Until then, stay inspired.
Thank you for listening to the Inspiration Place podcast. Connect with us on Facebook at facebook.com/SchulmanArt, on Instagram @SchulmanArt, and of course on schulmanart.com.